Hello and welcome to Moments in History. I'm Linda Shenton Matchett, author, speaker, and history geek. While researching my stories, I unearth tons of intriguing historical information that does not end up in my books. So I've created this channel to share those tidbits with you. I appreciate you stopping by to watch. Today, I'm discussing the Progressive Era during which my novel Love and Chocolate is set. America's Progressive Era coincided with the latter part of England's Victorian era, the entire Edwardian era, and throughout the end of World War I. Both countries experienced extensive upheaval and change during that time. In the U.S., widespread social activism sprang up to address the problems caused by rapid industrialization, urbanization, immigration, and political corruption. Free school meals for poor students, free dental and medical care for the poor, day nurseries and baby clinics, and public playgrounds are a few of the results of people such as reformer Jane Addams. Monopolies ruled the major industries such as John Rockefeller's Standard Oil, Andrew Carnegie's Steel Company, J.P. Morgan's Northern Securities, and the Vanderbilt grip on the large percentage of the rail and steamship companies. Others included Jay Cooke in finance, James Buchanan Duke in tobacco and electric power, Andrew Mellon in finance and oil, James Fisk in finance, and the intriguingly named Thomas Fortune Ryan in public transportation and tobacco. These magnates were referred to as robber barons by the press, alluding to their corruption and exploitation of workers. The era saw the beginning of mass media with a surge in popularity of magazines because national advertising brought down the price of the periodicals, allowing the general public to afford subscriptions. And the magazines regularly covered corruption in government and industry. Investigative journalists became known as muckrakers after President Theodore Roosevelt commented that reporters were not being helpful by raking up too much muck. McClure's was one of the more widely read magazines with a reputation as being a muckraking periodical. Articles on chronic urban poverty, unsafe working conditions, child labor, and other social ills were often found in its pages. Upton Sinclair's 1906 novel The Jungle was a fictional expose on the unsanitary and inhumane practices in the meatpacking industry, and McClure's added that subject to its arsenal. Some of the more well-known journalists at the time were Ray Stannard Baker, George Creel, Brand Whitlock, Lincoln Steffens, David Graham Phillips, and Ida Tarbell, who was famous for her criticism of Rockefeller and Standard Oil. 6 U.S. presidents served during this era, and each attempted to address the issues with varying success. Benjamin Harrison was the grandson of 9th U.S. President William Henry Harrison, who was the first president to die in office. Benjamin modernized the Navy and got 2 acts passed: the McKinley Tariff, which imposed historic protected rates, averaged duty on imports to almost 50%, an increase designed to protect domestic industries and workers from foreign competition. The Sherman Antitrust Act from 1890 prohibits anti-competitive agreements and unilateral conduct that monopolizes or attempts to monopolize a relevant market. The act authorizes the Department of Justice to bring suits to prohibit conduct violating the act, and additionally authorizes the act with private parties injured by conduct violating the act to bring suits. President Grover Cleveland intervened during the 1894 Pullman strike to keep the railroads operating, and referred to in several sources as a formidable policymaker. He was a Democrat, but when he entered office, he did not fire Republicans he felt were doing a good job. He also reduced the number of federal employees in departments that had become bloated with political time servers. President McKinley restored prosperity after a deep depression and kept the nation on the gold standard with the Gold Standard Act, and protected manufacturers and factory workers from foreign competition through passage of the Dingley Tariff. President Theodore Roosevelt was perhaps the most aggressive in his attempts at dealing with corruption and monopolies. In the first of 44 antitrust suits, he sued J.P. Morgan in the Supreme Court and won in a 5-4 decision. He is said to have gone after only bad trust, those that cornered the market, charged exorbitant prices, and underpaid and mistreated staff. President Taft sought reductions in tariffs and attempted antitrust reform, but unfortunately his administration was marred by controversy over conservation and the antitrust suit cases that he did file. President Woodrow Wilson turned his attention to reform in several areas, including business, agriculture, and banking. During his term, tariffs were reduced, and the Revenue Act of 1913 was passed that created the modern income tax. That same year saw the passage of the Federal Reserve Act, which created the Federal Reserve System, the central banking system of the U.S. The following year saw the passage of the Federal Trade Commission Act, which created the Federal Trade Commission, the agency tasked with investigating antitrust violations and enforcing antitrust laws independently of the Justice Department. Then came the Clayton Antitrust Act, which built on the Sherman Act by defining and banning several anti-competitive practices. The president also attempted to deal with child labor and enact 8-hour days, but his efforts fell short. Science and technology played a large role during the era, and inventions include the automobile, the rotary telephone, the linotype machine, the Kodak camera, the movie camera, semi-automatic shotgun, electric streetcars, an elevator safety brake that allowed for construction of taller buildings, radio, smoke detectors, the remote control, and the Bessemer process, which created a system of mass production of steel at a lower cost. Begun in 1848 with Elizabeth Cady Stanton's presentation of her Declaration of Sentiments at the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention, women's suffrage continued to gain traction during the era. In 1869, the National Women's Suffrage Association and the American Women's Suffrage Association had been formed, and leaders wrote articles, held conventions, and lobbied government officials. In 1887, the first vote to grant women the right to vote was presented, but defeated in the Senate. Nearly 30 years later, in 1912, Theodore Roosevelt's Bull Moose Party became the first major political party to support women's suffrage at the national level. After 5 attempts, beginning in September of 1918, the House of Representatives and the Senate passed the 19th Amendment in June of 1919. Some of the notable progressive leaders whose names you may recognize are Susan B. Anthony, William Jennings Bryan, Clarence Darrow, Eugene Debs, John Dewey, Louis Brandeis, and Mother Jones. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to learn even more history, please stop by my blog. We're on my website at www.lindashentonmatchett.com. And please consider subscribing to my YouTube and Spotify channels, Moments in History, to see and hear new episodes that generally release on the second and fourth Fridays of each month. Click the bell icon in YouTube to be notified of new episodes. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.